Time to push that retcon button again. Over and over and over. Welcome back, Nerd Squad. We are back once more with another list for you where we'll be counting down some of the most frustrating moments in comics. The moments where things we thought we knew became things we didn't know via retcons. Join me as we once again traverse the Marvelverse to come up with 10 more of Marvel's worst retcons on this part 2 to our original list. And if you missed part 1, click on over here to check that out. It's got lots of fun, weird retcons on it for you. As always, stick around to the end of this list where I'll have some bonus content coming your way in the form of comment responses. Alright, now let's get counting. Number 10. Hank Pym's secret daughter. Nadia Van Dyne is Hank's daughter, who we didn't know existed until 2016. She was introduced in a free comic book day issue about Civil War II. Now of course I like Nadia Van Dyne as a character, don't get me wrong, but her being added in retroactively as Hank's lost daughter was something that I felt like was a bit much. When we learned of Nadia's backstory, we learned that she was the daughter of Hank Pym and his first wife, Maria Travoia. Maria was kidnapped during her and Hank's honeymoon and killed. Nadia ended up being raised in Russia, trained in the Red Room. Eventually she escaped after learning of who her parents really were. By the time she got back to America though to see her father, Nadia learned of his sacrifice to save the world from Ultron and his death as a result. She decided to seek out her stepmother Janet Van Dyne and became close enough to her that she felt compelled to change her own last name to Van Dyne, because that's not confusing at all. She's Hank's daughter, she's not at all related to Janet, and yet she has her last name. Number 9. Falcon's X-Gene. Remember that time Falcon was revealed to be a mutant and then we explained that origin away with, a faulty Sentinel? If you don't, let me explain. In issue 174 of Captain America, we see Professor X meeting Falcon and Cap. Charles implied Falcon's connection to his bird seemed telepathic, and that Falcon's telepathic abilities may be mutant in origin. Falcon himself took this suggestion to heart and even considered what it might mean for him to be a mutant, pondering on his strong, seemingly psychic link to his bird Redwing. He then encountered a Sentinel who identified him as a mutant, and so he was a mutant for a time. This was established, and this wouldn't really be revisited or retouched till 2001. Where the idea of Falcon being a mutant was tossed in the trash and explained away as a Sentinel simply malfunctioning. Wah wah wah. Number 8. Black Widow's confusing backstory. Natasha being a mysterious spy from Russia who switched sides means that yes, we are going to get a complex backstory for her, but it actually wasn't always that complex. Natasha was inspired to fight for her nation originally when her husband was assumed dead in combat. Her husband wasn't really dead of course, and it was implied that this was all part of a plot to basically encourage her to fight for her country. Before that, Natasha was a renowned ballerina. Later on, however, this whole origin was revealed to be a lie when we learned that the Red Room had embedded memories of her being a ballerina in her mind. They made her think she had trained in ballet, but she hadn't really, because I guess that's what the Red Room does, they mess with you and give you fake memories. Her story was also changed from a woman who was inspired by her husband's sacrifice to put her own life on the line for her country as well, to that of a woman being blackmailed and threatened into becoming a spy in order to protect her husband. Number 7. Professor X married Mystique. Some retcons that are really strange come from film inspiration. As a lot of people discussed in the comments, many feel that Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, for example, would still be mutants today if it wasn't for their being introduced in the MCU's Avengers franchise, which didn't have the rights to include mutants, so we had to kind of unmutant them. I feel as though the case was possibly similar for this weird, secret retcon. In 2013's Uncanny X-Men issue 24, we learned of Mystique and Charles Xavier's secret marriage, meaning that the child we saw Mystique gave birth to while in the guise of Moira McTaggart was likely one willfully conceived as opposed to Mystique tricking Charles into sleeping with her, which would have been super weird and pretty not good in my opinion. In the X-Men prequel films such as First Class, which came out in 2011, we see a different kind of relationship between Raven and Charles. We get this weird love triangle between Charles, Raven, and Eric, and it seems more of that likely influenced this weird retcon plot point revealed in the comics in Charles's will. Number 6. Thanos. Number 1 dad? Thanos has never really been known as a caring and kind person. Even the people he keeps close to him are never really fully safe from his wrath. Faithful servants, family members, to Thanos, everyone is pretty much disposable. The same could be said for his adopted daughter Gamora, who he hardened and transformed into a killer until she ended up later rebelling. In the 2019 Thanos series, however, we learn how Gamora's relationship with her father was, well, more complex. How he actually, in his own way, was kind of a good father to her. This series also highlights how much they both cared for each other, despite the fact that an Infinity Gauntlet, which happened in the 90s, pre this series, but in terms of continuity would have taken place after this, Thanos seems to not show any regard for his adopted daughter's life. So, it's kind of a retcon. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Number 5. Spider-Man's non-sister. So this is kind of another retcon that for me is similar to Nadia's. I like the idea of this character, but the whole story involving her is, well, it's pretty wacky. Teresa showed up in Amazing Spider-Man Family Business claiming to be Teresa Parker, Peter's sister. She believed she was the daughter of Richard and Mary Parker, Peter's parents, and we got a few cool adventures with her, assuming this belief to be true. She was retconned into existence, but honestly, I thought she was kind of a cool retcon to add in, so I was cool with that. However, things got weirder when we learned that the secret sister we'd never heard of till now was all a lie, and that Teresa actually wasn't who she said she was, despite what she herself had been manipulated to believe. It was all a trick, and Mentalo had manipulated Teresa into believing it herself. It was all part of Kingpin's plan to basically lure Peter to a tomb. And we don't actually even know who Teresa's parents are now. It's still a mystery. They even manipulated how Peter saw Teresa, making her appear more like him, so she'd look more like his sister. It's weird. I wish she was actually his sister. That would have been cooler, I think. Number 4. Spider Destiny. Now you know me, I love the Spider-Verse, I love spider totems, but not all fans share my bizarre obsession with the Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon stories and the villains known as the Inheritors. I swear I'm like the only person that really loves the Inheritors. If you also love them, let me know in the comments. Show yourselves. With these stories came a pretty huge retcon, which basically implied via learning about the Great Web and the spider totems placed within it that every spider, man, or person had a kind of destiny to become that spider person. In other words, Peter Parker didn't have a freak accident, he was actually destined to become Spider-Man. It was fate! Many fans were not a fan of this change to his origins, as they felt it detracted from what makes Peter Parker so appealing, that he's just an average kid who got a freak spider bite that gave him powers, as opposed to it being all ordained. Number 3. Kang. Sometimes we talk about retcons that are ridiculous because they hurt the overall story. Other times there are retcons that feel like they don't really need to happen, and then there are those that just cause more confusion than really necessary. That's sort of the case with Kang. Kang the Conqueror was a villain who was first introduced in Avengers issue 8 in 1964. He is known for being a time-traveling villain who enjoys sitting and floating around while menacing other people. As time went on, however, we'd come to discover, due to the fact that he's a time traveler, the Kang was actually a bunch of other people, including Immortus and even Iron Lad. While these retcons were sometimes interesting, they don't really add much to his story, and at this point Kang being revealed as just about anyone is so old hat, it's kind of lost its shock value as well. Now we're gonna get him in the MCU, I don't know what that's gonna be like. Could be weird, could be great. Number 2. Aunt May's death. Remember when Aunt May died, but it wasn't really Aunt May but an actress who had actually died while impersonating Aunt May? Yeah, that was a weird villainous plot. What we saw in the comics as an elderly Aunt May's death was later retconned into being one of the weirdest and most elaborate plots of Green Goblin's criminal career. It was later revealed that the woman who was dead and buried and who we thought had been Aunt May was actually an elderly actress who happened to be on her deathbed and who had agreed to take on one last role in order to torment Spider-Man? Prove how great of an actress she was? Her motives are pretty foggy. Maybe Green Goblin agreed to pay any surviving relatives of hers a ton of cash? I honestly don't know. What had really happened was this actress had been genetically altered to exactly match Aunt May's genes, meaning no one at the hospital suspected this imposter to be a fake. She died after revealing to Peter that she knew he was Spider-Man, and was even buried in Aunt May's intended plot next to Uncle Ben for a time. That is, of course, until we all learned that Aunt May was really still alive, and this had been some kind of bizarre ruse. Number 1. Clone Saga. I won't deny that in my time on this channel I've come to actually somewhat love elements of the Clone Saga. I originally disliked Clone Saga when I started working here, but I very much have come to appreciate parts of the story and to acknowledge that without Clone Saga, we wouldn't have some very awesome characters like Ben Reilly and Kane Parker. However, one thing I still cannot get over is how long Marvel spent tricking everyone with this story. People spent 20 years thereabouts thinking they were reading Spider-Man, as in Peter Parker, only to find out that all those stories were not his, but actually belonged to a clone. Granted, at least it was a pretty cool clone who we'd all come to love after. But at the time, this was a pretty shocking and frustrating revelation after years of stories, and it left a lot of fans feeling betrayed at the time. Thank you so much for watching, Nerd Squad. What are some of the retcons that grind your gears the most? Which retcons do you wish you could just retcon away? And which retcons do you actually enjoy and think serve a purpose? Let us know in the comments below. And speaking of comments, it's time to take a look at some of the comments from part 1 to this list, top 10 worst Marvel Comics retcons. Our Braff Music suggests you should include the names of the writers who came up with these retcons so we know who's behind the nonsense. Now, I actually thought about listing all of those for you folks, but I feel like it's kind of unfair to throw all those writers under the bus. Let's not forget that sometimes writers don't get to choose which story to tell. They're just given and kind of forced into writing things and making the best of what they got. And just because a writer wrote a retcon you really hated doesn't mean that they couldn't write something later that you really loved. So I figured I would just give them a break and not maybe unnecessarily in some cases roast them and focus on their names. But you're welcome to check it out if you want. Jesse Mar Malintapang writes, "She has tapped into the Speed Force. It's over." I'm hoping that means you enjoy our new background with all the whooshing. I really like it. Combined with sometimes how fast I talk, it definitely makes me feel like a speedster. Matthew Shadow writes, "Wanda and Pietro are still mutants for me. No retcon will change that." Wow, I empathize with that passion, I acknowledge that retcon, I resentfully respect that retcon, but it still breaks my heart to think about it. No! Just let them be mutants again, please. And that's all the time we have for comments today. Comment below for a chance to have your thoughts and feels shouted out in a future video. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I'm your host Amanda McKnight. Till next time, you stay nerdy, YouTube.